Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and today we're joined by author Scott L. Smith Jr. He has had so many popular books. I guarantee you've most likely read at least one of them. And now, a brand new one, Near-Death Experiences, which explores these accounts from a Catholic perspective. Scott, it's great to have you with us this morning.
Yeah, great to be here. Good morning.
Yeah. So for our listeners out there who might not be too familiar with this all, can you explain what a near-death experience is?
Sure. So, and it's great that medical science is finally starting to study this phenomenon because science has been so only the natural world exists and ignore all evidence to the contrary for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But the characteristics of a near-death experience are, well, first and foremost, that you're suffering some kind of death experience. You know, a lot of the medical studies into this have been with cardiac patients. And then there's certain characteristics of near-death experience, like a tunnel, the tunnel experience, the light at the end of the tunnel, that disembodiment or out-of-body experience element. A life review, like an illumination of conscience, maybe even the particular judgment itself, some kind of experience with the divine, whether it's an angel, a loved one that's deceased, or Jesus or God himself. And that experience of intense joy, if the near-death experience is an experience of heaven, right? What makes us uniquely Catholic is that there's two other places you could experience as well. If you are sent to your particular judgment, we also have purgatory, hell, right? So some of these experiences, like St. Teresa of Avila, she experiences hell. Very can be very sometimes difficult to read about.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So I guess a question for you, what was it that really drew you to explore near-death experiences? Did you have one yourself, or was there a particular moment that sparked your curiosity there?
I did have a family member experience a near-death experience, not to be redundant, but I was honestly pretty cynical about the subject. I hadn't ever seen a Catholic source talk about it. And then I was told by another author of a near-death experiences book that a non-denominational Christian who said that there's basically no Catholic treatment on this subject. So if a Catholic is interested in this subject, they either have to read a Protestant book or worse, some kind of New Age book about mediums and psychics and necromancy. And so my interest in this first and foremost was this is really important for Catholics to provide a safe harbor for Catholics and even to evangelize what we know as Catholics, the fuller truth of heaven, hell, purgatory, of the Blessed Mother's advocacy for souls, and our need to pray for the souls in purgatory.
Yeah, I'm glad you have something now out there for Catholics, because I mean, if someone isn't really have like a foundation of what our church believes in, then they can certainly get led astray by reading one of these books, whether they're Protestant or kind of like those weird ones. But so I guess a question on that, does the Catholic Church have an official stance on NDEs or near-death experiences?
So you can't flip open the catechism and read something about near-death experiences per se. There are some almost magisterial writings on these subjects and writings by doctors of the church and church fathers. So when I was first started digging into this, I found the near-death experience of St. Teresa of Avila, who is one of our greatest saints, one of our, a doctor of the church. And that was convincing. And then I found that Pope St. Gregory the Great, who is a giant, right? Our calendar is based on Pope St. Gregory, Gregorian chant. I found that he wrote extensively on the topic in one of his best surviving works, the Dialogues. And at that point, I was like, wow, okay, church has a vast history on this subject, and it needs to be told.
So yeah, in your new book there, near death experiences. I mean, you've already shared a couple, with Saint Teresa Avila and Pope Gregory. What's one account that really stood out to you aside from those two?
Well, there are some really beautiful contemporary accounts of priests. One of Father Stephen Shire, who dies and goes a particular judgment, even though he's a priest. His judgment is damnation. That one really stood out. Mother Angelica interviewed him a couple times. One of the ones that I just keep going back to is Jonah. I was, I, I think a uniquely Catholic approach to this subject isn't just contemporary accounts, right? Because we're not just a contemporary church that just started in a mall somewhere. We are ancient. And so not only does that involve the stories going back, 2,000 years, but involves biblical accounts of near-death experiences. And I don't think anybody had really analyzed the Bible using the framework of near-death experience before. And so when I started digging into Jonah, his near-death experience, being dead in the belly of a whale, and there's some disagreement as to whether he actually died.
Sure.
But if you look at Jonah's own description of the event, he describes going beneath the bottom of the ocean, crying up from Sheol, right, which is like the pre-purgatory kind of place, the bosom of Abraham. And Jesus also seems to confirm this as well when he says, "You will receive no sign but the sign of Jonah, that a man should die for 3 days and rise again, and in rising again be a great testament, lead to the atonement and repentance of the whole city of Nineveh, or even for Jesus, the whole entire world." So, and then St. Paul looking at researching what a stoning was actually like in first century Israel, reading the Mishnah and the very exacting requirements of capital punishment in Jewish society. I mean, it was all just a fascinating research and exploration. I personally, I've really enjoyed learning about this subject.
I can only imagine. And when I saw that, talked about Jonah and St. Paul, I was like, wow, this goes back further. Like, this isn't something new. And like you said, has anybody ever explored this with the biblical figures of those two? So that's really great. Thank you for shedding light on those.
Oh, sure.
So there's many out there who are very skeptical of NDEs, and they're saying maybe just it's the brain playing tricks. So how do you respond to that? And how, I guess, what evidence has convinced you that there's more to these experiences?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways to answer that question. I mean, we have, St. Teresa of Avila talking about this phenomenon, being dead for 4 days. Like, everybody believes she was dead. They put wax over her eyes. They had said her funeral mass. They had even prepared and opened her tomb for burial. The only one who didn't believe she was dead was Don Alonso, or that she could come back. And then she goes on to describe her experiences in her autobiography and in some of the biographies that others did of her and that were near contemporaries of her. So, I mean, if St. Teresa of Avila can't convince you, it's going to be difficult to convince you. And she's also one that convinced St. John of the Cross to ask St. Joseph for intercession. So she was very convincing. But then if that doesn't convince you, we have about 20 years or more, really medical research into this subject began in the 70s, more or less. And even the term near-death experience, even though St. Paul uses that actual term, near-death, it's been studied since like the 1800s. A Frenchman coined the term, exploring the experiences of hikers that had survived great falls in the Alps. But recent medical studies have been multi-continent, multi-university, multi-hospital, multimodal, very extensive studies of this phenomenon. And if medical science, right, who doesn't believe in anything supernatural, it seems like,
Right.
If they can be convinced that this is occurring to people, they don't necessarily say why or that supernatural, just that it is occurring and people have knowledge of events that they should not have knowledge of, that they're able to see, retain images, memories of events happening in their hospital room, outside their hospital room, at home, despite being clinically dead, like brain dead or at least cardiac death. If that's not convincing, it was certainly convincing for me.
Yeah. I mean, come on, folks, let's follow the science already. That's what we were kind of force fed over the last, 4 or 5 years. Scott, before we wrap things up here, what is you'd say that the biggest takeaway you hope people get from your book?
So there's a couple big things. Some I've already alluded to, like watch out for the new age dark sides of this. And I think this book is, because the interest level in this is very high, which I found out. I did not, upon posting this book, and the amount of interest has been extraordinary. But now you have a book, if loved ones, children are interested in this subject, now we have a book written with the accounts of the saints of this subject. So I think it's good to keep people away from things that are strictly forbidden in the Bible, right? Like necromancy and communication with the dead, which can often go into the diabolic, right? So here's a book that's a safe harbor. And I'd also say I was struck by people whose near-death experiences included purgatory, seeing family members in purgatory, sometimes from parts of their family that did not believe in purgatory, and our responsibility to pray for those in purgatory whose family did not believe in purgatory. And we're the only ones that can pray for them.
Wow. Scott, can't thank you enough for joining us. And for those listening out there who would like to check this book out, got to go to Sophia Institute Press, and you'll find his book. And there's so many more that we could go on to further, maybe in the after show clubhouse. But thanks again, Scott, for being on board here this morning. And that is it for Morning Joy, where truth matters. We're about to transition on over to our after show clubhouse, where we get to relax a little bit and debrief from today's show. But if this is us truly parting ways for the day, God bless and make it a joyful day. We'll see you tomorrow.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.